overall. The reason it's not in national interest is there are so many reasons, but there are 3 or 4 key reasons I'd like to bring up. The first is that if we are commissioning a scheme which creates the most expensive airport in the world at which planes can land, that is not in our national interest. It doesn't lead to greater competition. It leads to more business being driven elsewhere across Europe, elsewhere across the world. So the idea that landing fees will rise and somehow that's a great benefit to our country is completely misplaced. It's a very naive thought, and doesn't come from a business perspective. I think the second thing is the viability of Heathrow to actually finance this scheme in the first place. And when you look at their financials, I'm not saying they're in difficulty today. I wouldn't wish to cast aspersions on them. They're making some pretty decent profits. But actually, when you look at their gearing ratio, they're already sitting, I think it's at about 87%. This is quite worrying. We were deeply disturbed when Thames Water was at about, I think it was 81%. Got very, very concerned about them. Nats were restricted by the CAA to just 65% gearing. And yet with this scheme, the government is suggesting somehow that Heathrow should go all the way to about 91% gearing. That's really a bizarre amount of pressure coming from the government to create an unstable and financially unviable company or scheme in that regard. And that does lead me to another point, which is we all sit here thinking that, oh gosh, of course, Heathrow really want to develop this runway. You know, I'm sure that's what the Department for Transport think all the way through. I'm sure that's what lots of members here think, that they really want to develop this runway. Well, let me just cast a note of doubt on this. Think about the obstacles. They're going to have huge legal challenges. There's still a lot of political uncertainty. They're going to have to conduct the biggest waste clearance project in the history of Britain, other than, I think, the Second World War. That could cost $1 billion. They've got to move the energy from waste plant, or buy it, or shut it down, or do something with it. That's another $1 billion. So when they go to their shareholders and their investors and say, hey, we'd quite like about £20 billion to create half a runway, where you can only fly during the day, but not at night, and we haven't even got clarity on how the slots are going to work and how they're going to be allocated. The idea that a shareholder is going to stump up, 20 billion on that basis is incredibly unlikely, because capital makes a choice about where it's deployed. So I simply ask the question: are Heathrow Airport Limited serious about building a third runway? And I really question that, because if they get the government behind them, the Secretary of State and the Conservative government supporting a third runway, they therefore shut out the competition from other runways around the United Kingdom. Gatwick won't be able to develop their runway. Everybody else is left with uncertainty. There will be no further runway developments if Heathrow are given the go-ahead.